is on video, so hundreds.
Somebody's listening to the news in the background as well. All right, I think we might make a move. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another Birds. There we go. Sorry, everybody. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us for another Birds Meet webinar from the Urban Birds team at BirdLife Australia. We're thrilled to have so many people on board tonight. I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all calling in on tonight. I am in Dharawal country, just south of Sydney. I wanted to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge any traditional owners who are with us tonight as well. Again, reminder, everybody, just pop your cameras off and your mics on mute, please. That will help cut down the noise because we've got a really amazing 2 guests joining us this evening. If you didn't join our last session with Jacinta Humphreys, we're using a different system. We're using Teams, as you can see. Things work a little bit differently. Rather than using the chat function, because if you don't have a Microsoft account with Teams, you can't use the chat. We want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to ask questions. So I would like you to just, if you can see the slide that should be on your screen that says Birds Meet Creepy Crawlies, there is a program called Vivox that we are using to ask questions. So you can either scan the QR code, or if you just type in vivox.app into your browser and then put in the numbers 167-130-326, that will open up a little Q&A. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. So if you have questions during the night, pop your questions in there, and then at the end of the session, we're going to have the opportunity to throw as many of those questions as we can at Lizzy and Tanya. So please jump on over into that, get it open in a browser so you can ask some questions as you think of them during the session. But I think it's maybe time to start talking inverts, because without invertebrates, our bird life would be non-existent, really. They are a really integral part of our garden. And so we've got Lizzy and Tanya here from Invertebrates Australia. They are going to give themselves an introduction and talk about all their amazing accomplishments, but also give you a little bit of information about what Invertebrates Australia does as a registered charity, all about scientific research and understanding Australia's amazing invertebrate communities. So I am going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over, I think, to Lizzy first.
Yeah, thanks so much, Holly.
Welcome.
Can you see my screen properly now? Is that up?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
fantastic. It's a good start. Okay, thanks so much for coming on board, everyone. It's lovely to see so many people online, especially because this is not a bird-focused talk for a BirdLife Australia webinar. But of course, there are some really important connections between invertebrates and birds, and hopefully we can give you some new information about invertebrates and how important they are in our ecosystems. I am just going to also share my acknowledgement of country. We think this is very important, and so I would like to just double up again. And in the spirit of reconciliation, Invertebrates Australia would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and the countries that you're in today, and their connections to the land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. And I am in the land of the Moro people. I am in Perth, so I'm actually a little bit behind the rest of you today. It's 4 p.m. It's a lovely day here in Perth, and I hope it is where you are too. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to Invertebrates Australia, you might have not heard of us before. We're a reasonably new NGO, and the purpose of what we do is to use science and education to promote invertebrate conservation. We are all very, very passionate about this, everyone at the organisation, and we have a number of priorities as far as where we think we can be having the most impact on how to really promote invertebrates and how important they are, and also get enough information about how we can be saving them. So we're talking about restoring natural areas of importance for invertebrates. We're talking about securing the ecosystem services, which I'll talk a lot about today. Also about reducing pesticide use, which is also something that I'm very passionate about and something that I will talk about today. Increasing the communication of scientific knowledge. So Tanya and I are both scientists, and we are always out talking about what kind of data we need to support invertebrates and how we can all be contributing to that. And that's kind of the next section here too, is talking about promoting our iconic invertebrates and how we can be saving them. And Tanya's going to talk about Christmas beetles and in the community science area that we're working in as well. And of course, working towards threatened species listing is a really important element of conservation and how we can actually start bringing invertebrates into these conversations, because when you think about threatened species, invertebrates aren't always the first thing that comes to mind. So this is just an introduction to us and what we do. And to Tanya and I specifically, today we're going to be talking about ecosystem services and invertebrates. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to actually manage invertebrates in urban areas, because it's not a straightforward thing. And then Tanya's going to talk about the Christmas beetle work that we do and how we link that in with citizen science. So, invertebrates and ecosystem services. Now, I think most people will kind of recognize pollination as something useful that an insect does for us. People know that bees are needed to pollinate flowers, and that's kind of where people would kind of think that possibly where the value of insects end. But there are so many really, really important jobs that invertebrates do in our ecosystems just to keep them ticking. They really do keep our whole ecosystems alive, and I'm going to talk about some of these things today. So I'll talk a little bit about decomposition and how they're important for keeping our soils healthy, and about pest control, which is particularly important for the work that I'm talking about, and as a source of food. I do have a couple of pictures of birds because there is some really important connections between birds and invertebrates as well. And things probably people don't think about. I won't talk about this today, but there's lots of medicines and materials that are based on invertebrates. And also it's really vital for education. And I guess that's why a lot of you guys are here today, because you're passionate about the environment and learning about it. And I'm a really big supporter of the idea that you can't love what you don't see, and invertebrates and birds are both fantastic in that you can see them every day in your back garden. So I think they play a really important role there. So starting off with pollinators, as I said, most people kind of recognise that pollination is an important service. There are a lot of flowering plants that rely completely on invertebrates for their pollination. And you would generally think about kind of managed honeybees. When you think about pollination, there's been a lot of fuss over the last couple of years about the bees dying and they're not being able to pollinate our plants. But in reality, there are so many other species around that are really, really important for pollination as well, especially in Australia. We've got some amazing native bees, and Tanya would be able to talk about this for hours on end if you let her. And actually all sorts of other insects as well. So flies can be really good pollinators. We've got a hoverfly in the middle there. They actually are a fly, but they've evolved to look like a bee. There are wasps. Moths are really good pollinators here. And even this little beetle down here, basically any insect that is landing on one flower and gets pollen on it and moves to another flower is pollinating. And so there's a lot of really important invertebrates there. Something that people often don't think of as a service but is vitally important to our ecosystem is decomposition. So the breaking down of dead plant matter and animal tissue back into the soil so that all of that, all the chemicals and all the nutrients are there and then available for plants to use them. They kind of create this layer of organic matter within our soil, and this also promotes things like bacteria and microorganisms to break down at a chemical level. And it's really, really vital for nutrient cycling. So I guess I always get people to think about this in the context of losing invertebrates and what would happen if we killed off too many of them. You know, if we don't have healthy invertebrates in our soil, that dead matter is just going to keep compiling and we don't have those nutrients going back into our soils again. So really, really important. This is one that very few people know about, but I love bringing up as an example of how they're doing this really important job for us. Dung burial is a very, very important ecosystem service. So especially with animals that we have on our farms, like cows, we found out quite early in the history of colonisation in Australia that the native dung beetles in Australia can't deal with the poo from the introduced cows. So it was just building up everywhere, and it was messing up the feed for the cows, and it was causing a lot of flies to breed up. And so CSIRO actually had to introduce a whole lot of dung beetles in about the 1950s. Now we have lots of different species that can do these jobs. But again, it's just another example of if we don't have the invertebrates that can do this job in the system, a lot of these things kind of fall apart and you get waste where you don't want it. So I'll talk about this a little bit at length because pest management and pest control is my specialty. And one of the things I love about invertebrates are there's so many different types which have been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years just to control pests. Basically, they're very, very good at it. And they can contribute to the control of a number of different pests, not just like in urban areas, but also in agriculture as well. The thing I love about spiders and other insects that control pests is basically negates the need for chemicals in a lot of instances. There's no risk of it leading to insecticide resistance, which is one of the main problems in agricultural pest management at the moment, is we're actually seeing quite broad spread insecticide resistance. And of course, you don't get runoff like you do with chemicals, and they don't target non-target species like other chemicals can as well. So I just think it's really, really important to appreciate the role that these kind of insects and spiders play in our ecosystems. Now I'm going to introduce you to some of my favorite insect and arachnid predators, because there's a huge variety of them out there. Most people recognize ladybirds, but not everybody knows that they're voracious predators. So both as adults and as juveniles, they're particularly good at eating aphids. So you can see this adult here chewing down on an aphid, and this one up in the top right-hand corner is what a juvenile ladybird looks like. They're small, they're black and yellow, and they're spiky. And even as juveniles like that, they're very, very good at eating aphids. So don't freak out if you've got little spiky black insects like that on your roses. And this insect on the left-hand side here, this is called a lacewing. They're gorgeous as adults. They can either be predators or pollinators as adults. And when they're juveniles, they're these funny little kind of spiky animals, again, with these big sickle-shaped mouth parts. And they are amazing predators of a range of different pests. You can see those little eggs up on the left-hand side. You probably recognize them. You often see them kind of on wooden eaves and things like that. This is a lacewing. It's a really good sign in your garden if you've got lacewing eggs around. Now, some more predators, some of my favorites, praying mantids. You'll find them in most back gardens, and they're really, really good predators. They've got these huge front-facing eyes that are very good at tracking down their prey, very good depth perception. The picture I've got up the top here is of a parasitoid wasp. So if anyone's ever had caterpillar problems in their gardens, you might want some of these wasps around. They basically lay their eggs inside these caterpillars, which then grow up and then hatch out, causing the caterpillars to die and your pest problem to be solved. So we often use these in agriculture as well for agricultural pest problems. And down the bottom here, people often associate bugs with their long sucking mouth parts to be pests. You know, you often have citrus bugs and things like that you wouldn't want. But these particular bugs use that long sucking mouth part for a different reason, and they're sucking out the inside of a pest here. So it's an example of a bug that can be a really good predator. Now, I'm not sure if anybody recognizes one of these, but this is one of the most amazing predators that we can have in our back gardens. They are very small. It's an insect. It has 6 legs. And at this stage of its life cycle, it lives underwater. I might let you kind of guess what this might be. You can see those big mouth parts at the front there. And what this is actually a juvenile dragonfly. So as juveniles, these dragonflies live underwater. When they are ready to kind of hatch out, they crawl up a reed, they split out of their exoskeleton that you can see there, and then they fly around. And again, these amazing insects are predators both as juveniles and as adults. As adults, again, you can see by their really big front eyes, they're very good predators. They're really good at spotting flying pests like mosquitoes and grabbing them. And as juveniles, they'll eat these things, little mosquito larvae. So a really good tip is if you're having problems with mosquitoes, you want to try and encourage those dragonflies in your back garden, because they will quite quickly deal with those mosquito larvae in ponds and things in back gardens. Okay, now you'll have to indulge me for a little bit here because I'm going to tell you all about spiders. They are my specialty, and this is a Halloween special after all. So I took the liberty here to tell you a little bit about some of my favorite spiders. Orb weaving spiders are the ones that you will traditionally associate with being a spider. They build this big, beautiful web with a big spiral shape into it, a very traditional kind of spider web. And here we've got some very common ones you might see in gardens, a leaf curling spider, a garden orb weaver, and a golden orb weaving spider with that really characteristic golden silk. But there are so many other types of orb weaving spiders around as well. They come in all different shapes and sizes. This one down the bottom here is a scorpion-tailed spider on the left-hand side there. That's its abdomen that's curled up there. This is a bush orb weaver. They come in all sorts of different colours. We have a two-spine spider here with these gorgeous pink and yellow markings on its back. This is a triangular abdomen spider. They're super common, but very small. Again, an orb weaving spider that's really characteristic and quite gorgeous. And this one up on the right-hand side there is a wraparound spider, and they're almost impossible to see unless you actually kind of, disturb them and see them move a little bit. And they're one of my absolute favorites because they've got this amazing camouflage of being completely flat, sitting along a log. Now, I've got two examples here of some spiders that have really different hunting strategies. So again, they're both really good at controlling pests, and they do it in slightly different ways. So I'll start with this one on the right-hand side. This is a net casting spider, and you can see it hanging down here with this bright white silk net in between its front two legs. And what they'll actually do is they hang down like this. I think I just lost my screen. Somebody else started sharing. Let me try again. I'll bring myself back. Holly, can you just let me know if I'm back in the right spot again?
There you are. We've got bowlers and nest casting spiders.
Excellent. So they hold this net in their front two legs, they hang down and they stay there and they wait. And when a fly or something comes along, they throw that net and they catch it and reel it back in, just like a fisherman. And you can see their little faces here. They're called ogre spiders, so that's pretty appropriate for Halloween as well. They have these huge front eyes. They need amazing depth perception in order to throw that net and to catch the fly at exactly the right time. You can imagine just how accurate that needs to be. And these bowler spiders, they're quite small and they're quite beautifully decorated. This is actually the magnificent bowler spider, and they have a really interesting prey capturing technique in that they put down a long strand of sticky silk with a big blob at the end. And the bowler's name probably kind of gives it away a little bit in that they swing that round and round and round, and they throw it and they catch things, flying insects like moths that way with this big sticky thing on the end of a thread. But this is kind of a risky strategy. I mean, you could throw that bolus all day and still not catch anything. So what these spiders do is they actually have an amazing ability to put out the scent of a female moth. And moths are very good at detecting scents. And these male moths will fly in from kilometers around because they smell a female. So the spider will actually attract these moths in, trick them into thinking there's a female moth there. And that's how they get them close enough to catch with this bolus. So just another example of how these kind of these invertebrates have these really, really fascinating life histories, and that if anybody kind of, maybe a little bit scared of spiders, but as soon as you start learning about them, all these different amazing things kind of draw you in, and there's no end to the amount of interesting stories out there about the way these critters kind of live their lives. These are amazing back garden spiders. They're called crab spiders, and you can see here they're quite good at camouflaging themselves. And these particular spiders are pollinator specialists. So they will sit on the edge of a flower, they'll hide themselves in there, and they'll wait until a pollinator comes down, and then they'll go out and grab it and have a nice feed. But what's quite amazing is it's been shown that these spiders can actually change their colour within a certain range as well, so that they can perfectly match that flower that they're sitting on. There's 3 good examples here. Now, jumping spiders are some of my absolute favorites because they're absolutely everywhere, and there's so many different types, and they're a really nice kind of way to engage with spiders in your garden because they're basically the little kittens of the spider world. They'll run around, they've got very good eyesight, they'll look at you. This is a picture here of my hand with a little spider on it, and they will really engage with you quite nicely. They don't build a big web like the orb weavers. They kind of run around and sometimes use a bit of silk just to keep themselves the plants. But they catch their prey by being very, very fast and jumping on them. And again, those big front eyes help them do that. Now, my absolute favorite jumping spiders are the peacock spiders, and it wouldn't be a spider talk if you didn't talk about them. The reason why I think this is such an amazing story about invertebrates is we basically didn't even know that these spiders existed until about 10 years ago. And they were kind of discovered by a guy over in Sydney who was not an expert. He got fascinated by these species, and he needed to hunt down the information. And the reason why we didn't know about them at all is they are teeny, 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 tiny. And of course, I also have to talk about peacock spiders because this is a bird talk, and peacocks is kind of as close as I'll get. But they really do quite an amazing display, exactly like a peacock does, in that they have this brightly coloured abdomen that they flip up. They wave it around. This is the male when they see a female. They've also got these little side legs that they do a little dance with. And their front little mouth parts here, these are called their palps. They do a little drum, and each species has a different colour, a different dance, and a different little drum pattern. And they're finding new species all the time. I think they're up to about 160 different species. I found 2 different ones in my garden this year, and it's one of those marvels of nature in that they are absolutely everywhere if you just stop and look. So I love this story, and I hope that you'll all kind of get out and maybe have a look in your gardens for peacock spiders as well. Now, moving on to our ecosystem services again. I will talk about birds here again briefly because insects and arachnids are a vital food source for a huge number of birds. So up to 60% of birds in different areas are insectivorous. And again, if we're talking about trying to conserve insects, this is a really good reason to do it. There are also, of course, many mammals, fish and reptiles and other insects that will rely on insects and arachnids as food. So we're thinking about fish and, you know, native dragons in Australia and things like echidnas as well. So even if you don't particularly like insects and arachnids, this is a really good reason to worry about their conservation. And I will just quickly say sometimes it works in the other direction. There are examples of invertebrates that will eat birds too, but I just had to throw that one in there. Now, to apologise for putting the bird-eating spider on the screen of the bird talk, I will talk of other ways that insects are useful to birds as well. So there's this really interesting behaviour that birds do called anting, and they will sit on the top of an ant's nest and flap their wings around so that the ants climb all over their bodies. And we're not 100% sure why they do this, but we're thinking that there may actually be an active role for ants to come in and pick the parasites off these birds. It's quite a common behaviour in a number of different birds. And I think this is a really nice example of a cool kind of invertebrate bird interaction. And the other way, of course, with the interaction between birds and spiders is that there's a lot of birds that will use spider web in their nests. So they will actively go out and find the different silk from particular spiders and build their nests out of them. And hopefully you've all seen this kind of public awareness campaign related to Halloween as well. There's been a craze of putting fake spider web out in the past couple of years, and this is actually a huge problem because the birds will think that that's real spider web and they'll take this plastic into their nests. So just another little, I guess, something to be aware of with the problems with decorating during Halloween is trying not to use those fake spider webs here. It just seemed like the right place to talk about it. Now, finally, another ecosystem service of invertebrates is they could be really good food for us. There is a lot of interest out there these days about insects as a sustainable source of protein. We probably just need to change our attitudes a little bit and see how we feel about eating invertebrates, but I see a very bright future where we could be eating a lot more invertebrates than we do. They're also very, very water efficient. So I think in Australia, we may get there. Now, what I'm going to switch over to talking about now before I hand over to Tanya is just the recognition that there are a lot of ecosystem services provided by invertebrates, but there are also disservices. So it's quite obvious things like mosquitoes and cockroaches, they can be disease vectors and we don't want them around our houses. They also damage plants and our crops and can damage property when you're talking about things like termites as well. So the problem is here we've got this real kind of balance between wanting to control the pests that are having a negative impact on our lives and conserving the biodiversity of these really vital insects and arachnids in our systems that are providing really important ecosystem services. Because the reality here is if we kill off all our invertebrates, or we decrease their diversity, then we're actually going to decrease the function of our ecosystems. And an example here is this woman who's having to hand pollinate a tree in China because the insecticides have killed off all the insects. So the more insects we get rid of, the more effort we have to put into moderating our ecosystems. And in urban areas, one of the kind of ways that we control, invertebrates, or actually the main way that people will control invertebrates in urban areas, is to spray them. And I'm continually horrified by how much insecticide use gets used in urban areas, because the vast majority of it is either over the top or even not necessary at all. So I use this picture here because the vast majority of those invertebrates in that picture are actually not pests. We've got a hoverfly there. I told you about how important they are, both as predators and pollinators. Centipedes really aren't much of a problem to anyone. This is kind of a mayfly. It's not a mosquito. Crickets, maybe they make a bit of noise. I don't know. They're not really a problem. Cockroaches, yes, but that's not a dangerous spider either. So I think it's about kind of getting people to understand that we don't have to kill everything all the time. And it's kind of horrifying how much insecticides we do use in urban areas. There's been some research in the US that showed that in urban areas, on urban gardens, they actually used more pesticides than they do in agriculture. And this blows my mind, because I understand pesticide use in agriculture, because if they don't use those chemicals, then they might lose their crop and their livelihood, and that's a really big deal. But in an urban garden, there's just no reason to be spraying that amount of insecticides in your garden. There's a very high use of insecticides in houses, especially in public housing, and Australians spend a huge amount of money on household insecticides. So I'm probably kind of talking within the bubble of people that are very kind of environmentally conscious here today, but the reality of it is that there are lots and lots of products out there, and lots of people are using some pretty nasty chemicals in their houses and gardens. They're pretty widely available at places like Bunnings and Woolworths, and there's not a lot of regulation in urban areas for what people are using. So it's worth talking about. It is a big problem. And it's a problem because it affects so many different things in our ecosystems, especially in our cities. So we're talking about biodiversity loss from the direct impact of those insecticides, but there are also health impacts for us. It impacts the economy when we're buying chemicals that we don't need, and there are pests that then break out afterwards. And also huge impacts on the environment when non-target species are impacted. And if I tie this back into all the ecosystem services that are provided by invertebrates, it makes it pretty clear why we need to be paying more attention to insecticides and the way we use them in cities. So my kind of proposition to everyone today is that we need to rethink the way that we manage insects in urban areas. We really need to understand why people are using these insecticides. There are obviously some times where there is a real pest problem and we do need to deal with it, but I get this nasty feeling that the vast majority of insecticides that are sprayed are just because people don't really like that insect that they see. They're a little bit worried about moths or wasps, and so they spray without thinking. And I think this is where this idea of giving people more information and about what kind of invertebrates are in their gardens and how important they are really is so important. We also need to change the perceptions that people have about invertebrates and let them know about these important roles, but also offer alternatives to insecticides so that it's actually much easier to manage the pests that do need managing without those sprays. And this idea of changing public perception is really important, because when the vast majority of people think about invertebrates, they think about being stung, being bitten, having their houses chewed apart by termites. They think of food contamination and things like that. I saw this interesting statistic from the US in that 40% of phobias in the US are related to bugs or spiders, which kind of blows my mind, because the vast majority of bugs or spiders aren't anything to be worried about. There's way more things in life to be worried about rather than these kind of amazing creatures. And it just makes me a bit sad, because the reality of it is that less than 0.5% of all spider species are a risk to humans. It's so low. It's almost laughable at how much we hate spiders, considering how rare it is that they can actually do us any damage. And I guess it's kind of easy to blame commercial companies, but I really do think that they've had a role to play here in the marketing that they use and the false information that people are given. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was brought up with things like Louis the Fly and and kind of the idea of more smart, more safe, more team. You know, if you want to be smart and safe, then you're spraying pesticides. And this raid ad here kind of gets me because it says kill the bugs you see and kill the bugs you don't see. And the bugs you don't see are the ones that are doing all those really important ecosystem services. So this just makes me sad. And this image down the bottom here is from a very, very well-known pest management service. They've misidentified every single one of those spiders there. So they're really not even bringing the right kind of information to the table. I'll just go over this super quickly because I think it's hilarious the way the media deals with spiders. There is so much misinformation out there as far as these stories of gruesome spider attacks. This one turned out to be she'd scraped her nail on her leg on a nail and she'd gotten like a tetanus infection rather than the spider. And almost every time it turns out to not be the spider's fault. And it makes me sad the way they talk about spiders who are, you know, they're native animals, just like a koala caught in a fire. But whereas if there's a spider that's rescued from a floodwater, then there's talking about massive and horrifying and seems too horrifying to be real. Just the language they use makes me really sad. And this one, the journalist spent the whole article talking about how she had to move out of her house because there was a spider there now. But we can flip this story, right? This whole article could have said the opposite. It could have said, I got this amazing new housemate, it gets rid of all the pests. It sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Gets rid of all the pests, doesn't eat too much food, doesn't leave the fridge open, and just framing it really differently would make a big difference. So I'm calling out the media here as well and just saying you can do a better job with the way that you talk about invertebrates. This is a silly one. Tries to kill a wolf spider with a blowtorch and sets his apartment on fire. People are idiots. So some of the ways that we're changing perceptions is kind of, I guess, I love the way that the Save the Bees campaign has really changed pretty much global perceptions. You know, we've gone from people not really liking bees to knowing how important they are and everyone getting on this bandwagon of wanting bee hotels and wanting to save the bees. And Invertebrates Australia are trying to do a little bit of this in Australia, in the Australian kind of context as well. So we had a no spray spring campaign, just letting people know that it's okay not to spray your gardens this year, just at that very low level, and talking about why these things are so important. So we're shifting this from the idea of saving the spiders, ants, mantids, and cockroaches, as well as saving the bees. Now, I'll just really quickly go through how to encourage spiders and insects in your gardens, and I'm handing over to Tanya. Don't want to take up her time. But you really got to start thinking about your garden as part of an ecosystem in an urban area because there's not a lot of other space left in these areas. So if we're going to encourage biodiversity in cities, it's going to have to be in your garden. Now, we can encourage insects and spiders by very firstly not spraying. Seems obvious, but the sprays will kill a whole lot of different things. So only manage spiders that are going to be harmful to you. And basically that's only redbacks and funnel webs in most of Australia. Provide food and shelter. So native vegetation is always going to attract in pollinators. Anything that's got a flower will do the job here. But also I like to say be a lazy gardener. When there's long grass, when there's leaf litter, when there's bark and sticks around this, it's going to provide habitats for invertebrates in your garden. It'll provide homes for the predators, food for the decomposers, and water for all those invertebrates. So I'm giving you permission to be as lazy a gardener as you like and to leave some space for invertebrates in your back garden. I'll just end my part of the talk by very quickly saying that if any of this kind of rings true with you and you're interested in the work that we're doing and you're interested in promoting invertebrate conservation, you can join us. We have, you can join us as a member and you can hear a bit more about what we do and hopefully be involved with what we do into the future. So I will stop talking there and I'll hand over to Tanya to tell you all about Christmas beetles.
All right, hey, just going to share my screen here. Please give me a moment. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So Lizzy, you'll give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Perfect, awesome. All right, so I'll start by also acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I live and work on, who are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that are present tonight. So in case any of you are playing the Guess the Speaker's Accent game, my accent's Canadian. I'm from Canada originally. I've been here about 15 years, and I arrived in November, so around this time of year. And as soon as I got here, one of the first things people said when I told them that I was an entomologist and insect scientist was, "Oh my goodness, you are going to love it here. Not only do we have amazing insects, but every Christmas we have these beautiful beetles called Christmas beetles that descend en masse, cover the cities, cover the rural areas, and they're an integral part of our Christmas." And I remember the time being blown away that there is a place on Earth where Christmas is celebrated by beetles and with beetles, which was my introduction to these fantastic and amazing animals. And so if we take a step back and ask, what is a Christmas beetle? Well, Christmas beetles are beetles that belong to the genus Anoplognathus. So for those of you that are taxonomically inclined, there's an asterisk there because there's some work being done with the group, and we think that, or taxonomists think that Crawlies and Repsimus should also be folded into that group. So for the taxonomically inclined, the group is a little bit in flux. For everybody else, just stick with Anoplognathus. That's the group that we're mostly looking at. There's actually more than one species of Christmas beetle. There are about 36 species in Australia, and most of our Christmas beetle species are only found here. So this is an animal that is every bit as iconic as a koala or a platypus or a kangaroo. These are really our local beetles. And again, the fact that they're tied up with the holiday season in the summer is just such a lovely, lovely thing. As far as their distribution, they're found mostly on the eastern side of the country, but we also get a few in Western Australia. I believe there's 3 or 4 species that have been found in Western Australia and a few species in the middle. But you can see that it's a huge amount of the area that these species cover. Now, different species have different ranges. So if you're in one part of the country, you may have different species and be seeing different ones than if you're, say, on the other side of the country. If you're tuning in from Tasmania, I'm going to apologize right now because this beetle, Lamprima orata, is known as the golden stag beetle on the mainland, but in Tassie, it's known as a Christmas beetle. And this can be a bit of a source of confusion. As much as I think this beetle is amazing and beautiful, and I would love to work with it, it's not the Christmas beetles that we're talking about today. We're talking about what's called a Christmas beetle on the mainland. Okay, so like I said, when I first arrived here 15 years ago, everyone was telling me about the Christmas beetles and how awesome they would be. And in that 15 years, I've seen maybe 3 or 4 species, or 3 or 4 individual Christmas beetles in the area that I live in, the city, in Sydney. And this was a bit of a disappointment, to be honest. I was looking forward to seeing these beetles. But the more I talk to people, the more it seems that this is a common experience. People remember seeing lots of Christmas beetles in the past that are no longer there. And that's not just in regional areas, that's even in the cities. My neighbors who've been living in their homes for longer than I have will tell me about how when they were young, they had lots of Christmas beetles as well, and now they're not. Oops, I think we have somebody unmuted, I think.
It's stated intention.
Somebody just pop themselves on mute, please. All right, Tanya, I think you can probably unmute yourself and you're good to go again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is my screen still shared? Can you still see the slides?
I can see all of your slides, so you just need to go back. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so as I say, lots of people have this memory of Christmas beetles, but there doesn't seem to be any data on the subject, and this surprised me. Every year media calls and says, hey, do you know where the Christmas beetles have gone? And I have to say, no, I can't even say if there's truly been a decline because we have no long-term records. And this is a problem that's not just for Christmas beetles, it's for invertebrates across the board. I think it's a combination of the fact that we often historically have thought of insects as being bulletproof. You know, there's lots of them, there always will be lots of them, we don't need to worry. And sadly, we're seeing again and again and again that that is not the case. Invertebrates are just as susceptible to decline as any of the vertebrate species, if not more so in some cases. And that lack that lack of data has real world consequences, because if we can't demonstrate empirically that there's been a decline, then we can't apply for, say, funding for conservation activities because we can't show there's a problem. So to the question, which species, if any, are in decline? We don't know. We suspect strongly that something is wrong, but we don't have the long-term data to say for sure. Okay, maybe we can't say anything about overall decline, but perhaps there have been studies in localized areas that can say, at least in this one place, there's a decline. And the answer is no, we don't know if that's happened either, because we don't have any data on that subject. We don't know if there are regions of the country that are having a bigger problem than others. We don't know, conversely, if there are areas that are real hotspots. Okay, so let's just pretend we had data and say, okay, what could their threats be? What are the main threats? And again, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but we also don't really know. We strongly suspect that habitat loss is a problem. We know that adult Christmas beetles are found often in the tree in eucalypts. The adults are herbivores and they feed on eucalypt leaves. So we suspect that they're quite closely tied to eucalypt forest. However, the larvae are a bit of a question mark. That's a picture of not a Christmas beetle larva. That's a different type of scarab larva, but they're functionally, it's very difficult to tell them apart. And the problem is that, again, we don't really know what the larvae eat. We know that they're found in the soil, but scarab larvae can feed on everything from decaying wood to dung to the roots of particular plants. And we don't have that data for any of the Christmas beetle species in detail. So again, it makes it very challenging to try to think about what we could even do if we wanted to conserve these insects. So, I mean, all of this is a little sad. I think it's sad. And again, I talk a lot about how important insects in general are and how we should be protecting Christmas beetles. And one of the questions I get every single time without fail is, yes, Christmas beetles are beautiful, but why should we care? What do they do for us? And this question is always a little bit of a punch in the stomach for me, because no one asks this question about koalas. No one says, what is the point of a koala? What does it do for us? We accept that koalas are part of our natural heritage and they have an intrinsic right to exist. We don't extend that same grace to insects and other invertebrates. We always feel like we are kind of having to justify their right to not be driven extinct by us. And I think that's really problematic. I mean, just look at this beetle. This is a beautiful beetle. It's the beetle that's only found in Australia. This is our beetle. This is every bit as important as a koala or a kangaroo or a platypus. And we should extend it that kind of protection irrespective of whether it does anything for us. Having said that, I'm also pragmatic, so now I'll tell you what it does for us. Christmas beetles are part of a healthy ecosystem. Because the adults emerge in huge numbers at a predictable time of year, in kind of the late springtime when many other animals are rearing their young, they're a hugely important source of protein. These insects are basically giant, undefended balls of protein. They don't sting, they don't bite. They're a hugely important food source for lots of things as they're rearing up their own young. As they inevitably die, because Christmas beetles only live as adults for a week or two, those bodies fall on the ground and they become easy food again for things like reptiles and mammals and also birds and other insects. So the adults play a really important role as a food source. The larvae are also an important food source, but because they're burrowers tunneling through the ground, they're also really important for recycling nutrients into the ground, breaking down organic matter, and playing a really important role in soil health. So yes, these animals are important and we should protect them, but those aren't the reasons we should protect them. We should protect them because they're awesome and we have them here. And yeah, blows me away that people aren't more excited about that. So in a perfect world, we would have armies of entomologists descending across Australia, spending heaps of money and time surveying all of our Christmas beetles so that we know which populations are in trouble. And in a perfect world, we would have a time machine and we would have started that 50 years ago. So now we could be able to say, yes, this species in this place is declining. This species is fine. We, of course, don't have that. And so we are living in an imperfect world. And what we really desperately need to do is find a way of getting these data. And so Invertebrates Australia has launched the Christmas beetle count which is a large community science project where we are asking people to submit their sightings of Christmas beetles so that we can start to get a handle on what's going on. We also have some companion projects running to try to get some people on the ground to do these types of surveys. We have three main objectives. We want to identify species that are at particular risk, so those with small populations already. We want to identify areas of special risk or places that are home to rare beetles. And we would love to know what's causing the decline, assuming that there is one, so that we can take steps to reverse that. I'm lucky to have an amazing honors student, Emily, working with me this year, and her job is going to be to address some of these questions. One of the things we're going to be doing is going out and light trapping. So Christmas beetles are attracted to light, so you can go out at night, put on a light against a sheet. As beetles plop onto the white sheet, we can pick them up, take photos of them, and then let them go. And we can use those to identify them. And we'll be doing this across from inner city Sydney all the way out to Royal National Park to try to understand how urbanization is impacting Christmas beetles. So we haven't started light trapping. That's going to start in 2 weeks. So please enjoy this AI generated image of what it would look like if Emily and I were sampling currently, or at least what the AI thinks Emily and I would look like sampling in our lab clothes, inexplicably. I wish I had a million Emilys to do this work, the rest of the work in the other places, but we don't. And that's where you guys come in. We desperately need your help to figure out what's going on with Christmas beetles. And we've done this by setting up a project, the Christmas Beetle Count on iNaturalist. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, it's a global biodiversity database where you can submit sightings of any type of nature. And that becomes part of our record of what's going on in the natural world. And it can be extremely useful for scientists like myself when we don't have millions of very keen honors students to go and do all of this on the ground work. So the first step is simply join iNaturalist and then go out and look for Christmas beetles. A few tips of where to look for them. Then adults fly at nighttime and they're attracted to lights. So if you look around, say, street lights, often you might see them smashing into the back porch. If you've got a porch light on, they might be flying into windows. The adults also like to feed on eucalypt leaves primarily. So have a look in your trees. If you see lots of sort of chewed out holes in some of the eucalypts, maybe have a look around and see if there's a Christmas beetle there feeding. Once you see that beetle, take a picture of it, and preferably, if you can, take a picture of the top, the underside, the face, and the back end of the beetle. This is because some of the features we need to designate particular species are on the front and the back, especially the rear. We spend a lot of time looking at Christmas beetle butts because the pattern of hairs on the rear end of the Christmas beetle can sometimes be the thing that tells you that you have one particular species and not another. So if you can get those shots, great. But don't stress, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. If all you can get is one picture, please take that picture. We can make do with that data. Even if we can't get down to species, it still tells us that a Christmas beetle was there. And there are quite a few cases where we can figure out the species from a single picture. So do the best that you can. So how do you know if you have a Christmas beetle? It's a good question. Insect identification can be notoriously difficult. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips. The first thing to keep in mind is that Christmas beetles are a type of scarab. It's a huge group of beetles that all have a very similar, quite large, often body shape. And so all the beetles in that picture are scarabs, but only that one is an actual Christmas beetle. And so the things I use to look for Christmas beetles when I'm just trying to get my eye in, first of all, they have that very kind of cute, sort of big, chunky body. But the most reliable way to tell Christmas beetle from something else, similar, I find are those thickened back legs. Christmas beetles look like an insect that has never skipped leg day. They have these enormous, what would be the thighs on a human, much thicker, in fact, often than their middle pair of legs. And so if you compare that to the other beetle, so the kind of mottled colored beetle on the other side of the screen, that's an Argentinian scarab. It's a non-native, non-Christmas beetle, and you can see how skinny its legs are in comparison to our true Christmas beetle. So the thickened back legs are one of the best ways I have to be able to tell that I'm looking at a Christmas beetle. The other thing to look for is this duckbill. They have this adorable little kind of scoop on the fronts of their heads. It tends to be more pronounced in the males than the females, but you can often see it on both sexes. So that's a bit of an indication as well. And you can sort of look at the iridescent sheen. So folks often associate that iridescence with Christmas beetles. The problem with that characteristic is that there are lots of iridescent beetles that are not Christmas beetles, and conversely, there are Christmas beetles that are not iridescent. So while that might pique your interest, keep in mind that not every iridescent beetle is necessarily a true Christmas beetle. Okay, so we're gonna have a quick game of can you identify the beetle? So here is a beetle. Is it or is it not a Christmas beetle? I'll give you a few seconds. It is. So you can see thick back legs. This is one of the non-iridescent species, but still a Christmas beetle. How about this one? Nope. This is a lovely native beetle called a cowboy beetle. So excellent species, beautiful beetle, but not technically a Christmas beetle. And you can see those thinner back legs as giveaways. If you want to do a deep dive into Christmas beetle identification, the Australian Museum has a guide to Christmas beetles that will give you all the information you could ever want about how to identify them. But if you are not into insect ID, never fear, because the app we're using, iNaturalist, will do the identification for you. So this is a screenshot of a robber fly found around my house, and I took a picture of it to upload to iNaturalist. iNaturalist runs a machine learning algorithm that will try to guess the group that your insect belongs to. And because it learns, it's getting better and better and better. And right now, if you have a reasonably clear picture of a Christmas beetle, it will identify it as Christmas beetle and automatically include it in our project. So all you need to do is take a picture of the beetle, upload the picture, and it'll go to iNaturalist and get included into our project. Do not stress about correct identification. Even if what you have is ultimately not a Christmas beetle, it is still data, and we can use that data for other things. We have a crack team of people helping out, so that's a shout out to Hauke. He goes through he's been going through the submitted Christmas beetle sightings and fixing any identifications that are incorrect. So don't worry about whether you've got it right or not. We're keeping an eye on it, and the algorithm's keeping an eye on it. And just to sort of reinforce how important any data is, this is not a Christmas beetle. This is a fly I saw when I was on vacation in Jindabyne and out in front of my Airbnb. And I took a picture of it, uploaded it to iNaturalist, not thinking it was anything particularly special. And then within a few hours, I started seeing comments from specialists at the Australian Museum who specialize in fly identification, and they worked out that, to their knowledge, this was the first live image of this fly ever. Many of our specimens are only known from dead things. So, yeah, it's really exciting. And, this can be something with any sighting you have. So quickly, I'll tell you what we've learned so far. This is the project's second year. And so far, the first thing I want to say is thank you, everybody who participated, because we have an amazing community of observers here in Australia. We collected almost 7,000 sightings of Christmas beetles. Most of those were from last year and as the main driver of the project. There are over 3,000 people who are observing and submitting sightings, and this is a tremendous resource. Huge amounts of data for us here. We also really excitingly found 4 species of Christmas beetle that previously had not been seen for decades. So there's the 4 of them there, including one species, Anoplognathus veter, which was only previously known from a single male specimen seen in 1986 and never seen again. And so we had, I believe, 4 sightings of that beetle, which is really exciting. We're already getting great data. We're starting to recognize which species are of concern. So these are 3 Christmas beetle species that were only found in a very small area. They're not the only ones of concern, but these are just ones I picked as an example. And these are the ones that if we ever get the funding to go out there and survey, these are the ones we're going to look for, because we can see they're not found in a very big area, which makes them at risk of serious decline. Okay, so let's say you haven't ever seen a Christmas beetle. You don't think you're going to see one in your area. Is there anything else you can do to help them? Absolutely, spread the word. I'll put up some URLs at the end for you to be able to link up with our project. But even if you've never seen a Christmas beetle, tell your friends, tell your relatives, get everybody out there looking. The more eyes we have on the ground, the better chance we have of getting data that we can use to make a difference. So we absolutely need people out there looking for Christmas beetles. Like Lizzy was saying, please avoid insecticides in your gardens. Even things that are called organic or eco can be harmful to Christmas beetles. And those are just examples of the kinds of grub killers that can target Christmas beetle larvae. There are a number of pest scarabs we have in Australia, and that can cause a lot of anxiety for people when they find a curl grub. The problem is that almost all scarab larvae look the same. Even I can't tell the difference between different species from a grub. And so if you find a curl grub in your garden, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a pest. It could very well be one of our native beetles. And mostly because I've been kind of annoyed about this, I've been asking people in my local gardening groups to give me the curl grubs that they find in their gardens. And when we rear them out to adults, almost all of them have been native scarab beetles. No Christmas beetles, but these are 3 beautiful pollinating flower visiting species that are absolutely important, are not any major threat to anything. And so if you find a curl grub, please don't reach for the insecticides. I just move them to another part of my garden. Most of the time, they won't cause any problem. And if you have a lawn, consider replacing it with native plants, just as Lizzy was saying, native ground covers. Like I said, we're not really sure what the larvae of Christmas beetles feed on, but we're pretty sure they don't eat turf grass. So if you can replace any of that lawn with native vegetation, that will help Christmas beetles as well as other species. So I'm going to leave it there. If you're interested in getting involved, there's 2 different ways you can do that. The top is the link to the Christmas Beetle Project. If you sign up to the project, you'll get all of our updates and you'll know what's going on. But if you don't want to join iNaturalist as a Christmas Beetle project, you can also look at the Invertebrates Australia page, sign up for our newsletter there, and we'll send you updates that way. So whatever way you prefer. And again, just a reminder, if you're using iNaturalist, you don't need to join a project at all if you don't want to. Just upload your Christmas beetle sighting and it'll automatically be included in our project. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody, and happy beetle hunting.
Oh, Tanya, Lizzy, I think I'm an invert person now. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I realise we are kind of at time. We said 7 till 8. That we still got some people joining us. What I'll do is I'll just let everybody know that we will send out, we've got, of course, recording the session. We'll upload it to our YouTube channel like we've done with all our other Birds Meet sessions. That will go up tomorrow, and then sometime in the next week we will send an email out to everybody with the recording, and we'll pop these links in as well and let you know, remind you about how you can take part in the Christmas Beetle Count and learn more about Invertebrates Australia. If you want to hang around, Tanya, Lizzy, if you want to answer some of the questions, I'm happy to keep rolling. If people have to head off and do other things this evening, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to stay and listen to the answers, because there's a lot of questions, you are more than welcome to stick with us if you like. So Tanya, Lizzy, you up for a few more questions? Okay. So let's go with, what's a good way to deter pests from organic edible crops that's safe for the good inverts like the bees? And is it true that neem oil is bad for bees?
I
feel like it's you.
Can you hear me? I can start with that one.
Yep.
So we're talking about deterring pests from crops, right? Rather than just in back gardens. Yep. So that's actually,
I think probably in a back garden setting, but yes, in general.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's kind of this kind of idea of what is a pest, because I think, you know, caterpillars and things like that, aphids, they cause quite a bit of damage sometimes to the things that we try and grow in our gardens. But sometimes that damage doesn't actually translate to losing any of that, the vegetables and the things that we're trying to grow. Even having aphids on roses and things like that, the roses will still bloom and you will actually still get food from a lot of the stuff that you're growing. One of the things about controlling pests is the pests have to be there for the predators to come. And so if you kill them straight away, as soon as you see aphids, if you get rid of all those aphids, there's going to be no reason for those ladybirds to come. There's going to be no reason for those predators to come in and start controlling that pest. So what we talk about with pest control in back gardens is holding your nerve a little bit, kind of learning to cope with a little bit of damage there, because those pests will then attract the good guys to come in and start controlling them, and to kind of just keep an eye on that interaction as well. I've seen so many examples in my garden of the parasitoids that have come in to eat aphids. So you can actually tell because the aphids turn all brown and hard. They're called mummies, and you can see these aphid mummies that have hatched out these wasps. So it's just a tiny bit of knowledge, right? It's knowing that and being able to go and look at the aphids and going, hey, I've got parasitoids here, and being able to appreciate that. I think that that's kind of the way I approach it. There are obviously kind of more natural pest control remedies that you can use, but I think that unless it's a highly selective insecticide that only kills one particular type of pest, the vast majority of the time, it's either going to kill the insects that you're not trying to target, or even with the very selective ones, we don't actually know the non-lethal effects that they have on insects. There's quite a few examples with bees in agriculture where they're not actually killed by the insecticide that you're putting on, but they lose their memory and they can't go back to their hive and things like that. So I would try and stay away from any chemicals if you possibly can. And if you do have a really big problem with an insect that obviously is causing harm, like mosquitoes or termites and things like that, there are really good pest control professionals out there that will actually use non-chemical methods where they can, and use the least invasive methods possible. So I guess it's about talking to your pest controller too, and about working out whether they have alternative pest management solutions for you.
I think following from that, maybe I'll jump to this question which just came through. Is there a natural way to keep termites out of their house? Because Nadia has a termite nest in a tree nearby.
Well, actually, the termite nest in the tree nearby is a really good sign. One of the things that I know about termites is that they have real selective preferences for particular woods. So the first thing you can do is by building with jarrah and things like that, because they are less attractive to the termites. But actually, I talked to a guy who specialized in termite management, and he said having those kind of sacrificial plants in your garden that will attract the termites is actually a real benefit, because then they'll go eat that instead. But I think Tanya's got some experience with this recently as well. She might be able to.
It's not so much professional experience as I moved into a new house. And we also had to get it checked for termites. And the main thing, I think we had the same company come by, and they really stressed monitoring. So rather than treating if you don't have a problem yet, it's just being able to keep track of where termites are coming in. And so places where you have the soil intersecting with wood, those are the places that they get in. And so even if it's just as simple as checking back every now and again to see if there's any evidence that that wood is being hollowed out, or that you see the little termite galleries, and that's when you can start taking action, because it's going to take them time to get up there. So you can do stuff at that point and minimize your issues, rather than kind of assuming that you have termites straight away and treating every 6 months or something for a problem you may not have. And our house had old termite damage. And they were able to trap them out using termite traps to get them out of the house, apparently, the last time. So there's lots of things to do. But like Lizzy was saying, it's really about having a good relationship with a really good pest control company. And, they are out there, and there are ones that will work with you to do things in a sustainable way. Like, I was very reluctant to have anyone come into my house. I've got pet insects. I don't want anything sprayed if we can avoid it. So, there's lots of great places out there. You just kind of have to find them.
Amazing. Yeah, I think what I've taken away from tonight is just pausing to watch and pausing to decide whether action actually needs to get taken. Yeah, it's really great.
And I think I'd add to that thinking about what is your hobby worth at the end of the day. It's a different situation for farmers who it's a subsistence, they need the farm for money. For most of us, we are not relying on our gardens for food. And I love gardening, and it kills me when a prize plant is getting destroyed by something. But I would rather have a biodiverse garden. I would rather be contributing to local biodiversity than to get that carrot, that I could also just buy from the shop. And so it's sort of taking a deep breath and going, okay, I'm angry. I'm going to count to 10 and decide whether I really need, is it really worth endangering all of these animals for that piece of fruit or that particular flower?
Yeah, amazing. I like when I talk about bird-friendly gardening, it's often talking about sharing your space. You're sharing this space with birds, and you're sharing it with inverts. So that's awesome. Oh, there's so many questions. I'm not going to get to all of them, but I'm just going to go some quick ones. How to encourage dragonflies to get to visit your garden?
Yeah, water sources are going to be really important. So water is a difficult one because obviously they do attract mosquitoes as well. It's water that can encourage life. So it's going to have those reeds at the side. If you're going to have a pond, then make sure you've kind of got other resources there that things like the dragonflies and fish and things like that can use as well. And not just leaving little bits of water sitting around, because that's where the mosquitoes will get in and the dragonflies can't. So that's the main thing, just giving them space. Yep.
Okay, let's go with, what are your thoughts on prescribed burns and damaging insect habitat?
There's a big one.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to throw that out there for you.
Wow. Yeah, I think this is another. There's a lot of tricky ones, and this is a tricky one. Obviously, there's reasons we do prescribe burns, and that's important. I think what I would add is that we need to get better at considering invertebrates when we make those plans. So one of the insects I work with, or invertebrates I work with, is this beautiful blue velvet worm. If you haven't seen a velvet worm, after this, go to YouTube, type in velvet worm hunting, blow your mind. They shoot glue from little nozzles on the sides of their heads to hunt their prey. They are fantastic. In Australia, we have the world's only social velvet worm. It lives in groups in only one small part of the country. Unfortunately, that entire region was burned during the mega fires. It lost almost all of its habitat. And the problem now is that when we think of burning in that habitat, the normal way to do it is to burn the areas that haven't burned recently. And that works really well for vertebrates, but for a velvet worm that doesn't really move out of its log for its entire life, those patches may be the only refuge left. And so we just have to think, I guess, and it may mean making bad choices where there is no great option, but we need to at least think about it, because I think that's the risk, is that we don't think about invertebrates when we make these plans a lot of the times.
Okay. Oh, this was interesting, I thought. So, talking of pesticides, what about the monthly use of medications on pets? So we have, we use tick medication, we use flea medication. Is that a problem for invertebrates in the garden in general? Or is it sort of isolated to the dog or the cat that it's on?
Yeah, it is a really good question, because I've been looking at trying to get like a worm farm for my dog poo. Apparently that's a thing, and I've been looking into that as well.
Yes.
And the general advice is that you don't put the poo in just after you've treated them, but I actually don't think, again, we have a lot of evidence of what these do. I do know that with pharmaceuticals and drugs in general, there is the issue with them going into waterways and actually causing problems with invertebrates, like even just the stuff that we take and what goes into our waste systems. So it's a broader problem, but I think as far as kind of in your back garden, the treatments that are used on your pets, like the little drops that you put on the back of their neck and that kind of thing, it's very much just treating the animal that they're particularly in contact with. It's not going to affect us. It's not going to affect any of the other insects in your garden. The real problem with garden insecticides is when they come in and do those big sprays of broad spectrum insecticides, and it still does happen more than you would think. So I think they're the things that I would really worry about, because again, you can't worry about everything. Otherwise we would be so upset with every single, it's like all the plastic in my house, right? You got to draw a line somewhere. And I think for me, it's about doing the things that are most important to me and making sure that I have the impact that I can have without trying to stress about every tiny little action that we have.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, this one's speaking to me. Is there harm with having cockroaches in the kitchen? Even though it's as clean as I can make it, there's always cockroaches coming out at night.
Yeah. Are you in Sydney? Because that sounds kind of familiar. I mean, yeah, so cockroaches do spread disease when they have contact with food. So the thing that you have to be careful with cockroaches is making sure that your food is sealed up, and that's actually the best way to prevent them from causing a problem in your house as well. So sealing up doors, windows so they can't get in the first place, making sure that all food is sealed up and there's not moisture around. So they'll often be attracted to moisture kind of under the sink and things like that. That's how they survive. Not saying that you have a dirty kitchen, everybody's got this kind of stuff, right? But that's kind of what is bringing them in, and some of the ways that you can manage cockroaches without using, these cockroach bombs and things that you set up is just making sure that you're really, really scrupulous about the way that you contain food. And then if all your food's contained, then you're not really risking too much from them anyway. Nobody's licking the floor apart. So Although I do have small children, they
Yeah, I was
frequently
gonna
live the
say.
floor now that I think about it. They survive.
Builds immunity. It's fine. So, this one's slightly different. My 9-year-old son wants to be an entomologist. What studies did you do?
Yeah, that's a funny one because I think entomology is one of those topics where there's not necessarily a straight line from uni to being an entomologist. So there's very few places even in the world where you can formally study entomology as a degree. So we come from all sorts of educational backgrounds. My undergraduate degree is in environmental science and biology. And then often during that undergraduate university, you start taking maybe an insect course here if you can, or an invertebrate course, whatever you can. And towards the end, when you get the opportunity to do more research, that's when you can kind of start to specialize. So really, I know people who've come to entomology through agriculture. So they're agricultural specialists and they kind of get into insects that way. Lots of people come through ecology, biology, but there's also molecular biology, genetics, almost anything you can think of. You can get to insects that way because insects are like more than 75% of animal life. Like if you like animals, you like insects by default. It is an insect planet primarily. So there's so many different ways to come at it. I would say that now is like the best time to be a young entomologist because there's so many resources you can use. There's iNaturalist, which I spoke about. You can use that to find the insects in your area, upload your sightings. There's been so much advancement in photography with your phone. So I always have my little lens just kicking around in my pocket. And that just clips on to my phone and I can take amazing close-up pictures of insects just as I see them outside. So those sorts of things make it really, really easy for young people to really engage and just get out there, make sightings. I guarantee you that if you go outside and just look around and start taking pictures, you'll make a discovery. I guarantee you will discover something new because we have such tremendous biodiversity in this country and so little of it has been formally named. It's great.
Amazing. Amazing. So let's jump around. I'm jumping around all over. Frequently see dead Christmas beetles in the bush, even during winter. Does that mean whatever eats Christmas beetles is in decline too?
Oh, that's interesting. During winter. So I would also say, please upload those sightings because we're really trying to figure out when Christmas beetles are coming out. This year seems to be a very early. We were seeing them almost a month ago starting to appear, which is surprising. Christmas beetles as adults don't live that long. So as larvae, they can be underground for up to 2 years. But once they come out, they're really just eating and mating and dying. And that all happens within a month. So it's not unusual to see lots of dead Christmas beetles during the daytime. They'll have hopefully gone out, made it, eaten, and just ended their lives normally. I would be super surprised if the things that ate them weren't there because everything eats them. They're just easy protein. So I suspect the things that eat them are probably still there, I hope. But yeah, definitely upload. Even the pictures of dead ones are useful for us to get a sense of what's going on in different regions. So please submit those sightings.
Great. Yeah, we had, when we do analysis of powerful owl pellets, we often find over summer they pop up in pellets.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because the young birds, of course, are not skilled hunters. They're not ready to tackle a possum. So a Christmas beetle is a nice chunky source of protein for them and a good thing to learn to hunt on.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good to know.
Linda wants to know where you got your close-up lens from before we jump around to some other questions.
This particular one is called a Moment macro. So I bought it online. It's an American company, but their shipping is pretty cheap. It's not the cheapest of the lenses. I think this one was 100 USD. But you can get a pretty wide variety of lenses. There's, I know, the whole gamut of price ranges. This is the best one I've found so far because it takes like amazing close-up pictures with incredible detail, but there's so many options. So if that's a Moment macro, but there's others.
I got a super cheap one that cost me like $5 and it won't do what Tanya's does, but it absolutely is hugely a huge improvement on just your normal smartphone camera. It literally just clips on. So yeah, a lot of different ones out there.
Great, amazing. Oh, interesting one. What purpose do leeches serve? Our garden gets overrun with them.
Well, I will say that, you know, insect invertebrate ecosystem services are important, but I also think that we have to kind of just value invertebrates for the fact that they are part of functioning ecosystems, rather than expecting every invertebrate to have a useful purpose for us. That's a lot of what we talk about at Invertebrates Australia, I guess, is just this idea of biodiversity, and that all of these things have the right to live, and that they have evolved in these ecosystems, and that there's huge variety. Even if we don't see the inherent value of them, it doesn't mean that they don't actually, you know, have a place, and that they are part of quite an amazing kind of system. So yeah, I don't like leeches either, but I'm very happy for them to still exist, and I'm happy for them to, you know, to be doing their thing.
I quite like leeches. Again, if you're ever bored, Googling predatory leeches eating things is wild. These animals are fantastic. They have amazing hunting skills. Leeches are a group. It's not just one animal. So you're talking about many different species, and most of them are not going to be attacking humans. A lot of them are hunting fish or eating earthworms and other things. And yeah, they're very cool. So they get a bad rap.
So I think we might just ask a couple more questions and then we'll let everybody go, because we're quite over time, but I could sit here all night, I think, quite easily. What would be the reasons that golden orb spiders are declining in our garden and they don't use insecticides?
You've asked the right person about this, because I literally did my PhD on golden orb weavers in urban areas. Although if only I had an answer, because this was 4 years of my life and I still don't know. Okay, so the thing about insects and invertebrates is they're also very, very variable. So you will have hundreds of them one year, and you'll have 3 of them the next, and you'll have no idea why. And then there'll be hundreds of them the next year. So in some cases, we know why. Things like cicadas, they have quite set rhythms. So there's some species that will live underground for 17 years exactly, and then they'll hatch out. And that's fascinating, right? And then there'll be species like these golden orb weavers where I studied the temperature, I studied the rainfall, I studied how much food there was for them, and I could not work out why there was so many one year and there weren't the next. It was horrifying for me, actually, because I spent, in my first year of my PhD, I went out and collected a whole lot of them to study them. And then I went back the next year and there was none, and I stood there going, I've decimated this population. I've just destroyed this thing by collecting them for my research. And then they were back the next year, and there was fewer of them everywhere that year. So something was going on. I think the thing about these inverts is they have these really, really tightly kind of organized environmental cues that tell them when they're supposed to be doing different things in ecosystems, like when they're hatching and when they're eating and when they're breeding. And because a lot of our ecosystems are a little bit out of whack, sometimes that actually can really affect an insect. And we see examples of this in urban areas where we've got the urban heat island effect. So they're actually hotter because of all the concrete sucking up all the heat. So the plants kind of flower earlier because they're getting the environmental cue to flower. And then the pollinators aren't getting the same environmental cues, and the pollinators aren't around at the right time to pollinate these plants. And so we get kind of this decoupling within these ecosystems. So there could be something like that going on. But again, so much more research needs to be done here.
Excellent. Thank you. I think last question. There's lots of thank yous and congratulations. Everybody has loved the session, and I have to agree. But Tanya, I think this one for you. Do you have a suggestion for what type of native ground cover might be best for Christmas beetles?
I don't, unfortunately. So I spent a good couple of months at the end of last year trying to find any information at all about what Christmas beetle larvae need. And that there's really nothing. So my go-to when I think of ground covers is that I try to look for things that are native usually, and try to look for things that have something that they will provide to insects and other invertebrates. So flowering plants are amazing. But not just because they'll help bees and things, but everything from lacewings to spiders to ladybirds to assassin bugs do better if they have access to nectar. Even things we think of as predators. So any kind of flowering native ground cover that you can get to grow would be amazing. If you can't get a flowering one, think about how complex the leaves are, because the more kind of nooks and crannies you have, often the more places there are for things to hide. And again, that probably won't help Christmas beetles. because we don't know what to plant to help Christmas beetles yet, but it will help other invertebrates largely. So there's lots of places you can go and get good lists of ground covers that will grow well, and just experiment. A lot of urban insect gardening, I think, is experimenting. So plant something, see how you go, observe what comes to that patch. If it's going great, get more. If it's not going great, maybe try something else. Look at your neighbor's patch. What do they have that's doing really well and that's attracting lots of things? We're all learning together, and I think that's great. We're all making these discoveries together at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar situation for birds. It's about trying. It depends what birds are in the landscape, how everything is moving around. It's all connected, and it's all a really similar process. And you attract the inverts, you attract the birds, and vice versa. So that's really great. Last question just came in following from that, and I think it's really interesting. Are there any links with sort of First Nations people and what they know about Christmas beetles and the types of habitats that they live in? Is that something that you guys have looked at?
It's not something we've looked at. It's something we desperately want to look at, because I think First Nations people have that repository of knowledge, that long-term data, all those things that we really need to know. And that knowledge has been lost for us, but it might not be lost for them. And so, making those connections is really important. But no, it's not something we've been able to do as of yet, but I'd be super keen to get into that space. I think there's so much we could learn.
Well, thank you both so much. A huge thank you to everybody who stayed late for the session. I enjoyed this so much. I could have chatted for hours. I have learned a huge amount. So Lizzy, Tanya, thank you so much for giving your time tonight for the session. Amazing experience. I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Thanks, Holly.
I popped it in the chat. We've recorded the session. So I'll be popping it up on the YouTube channel. The link is in the chat and on the VVox as well. But we will pop an email through to everybody from tonight and anybody else who wants the information. We'll get an email in the coming week which has the link to the recording. Any links and information that Tanya and Lizzy want to send through, we will absolutely pop in that email. But jump over to Invertebrates Australia, sign up with them, follow what they're doing, do the Christmas beetle count. I'm going to be doing the Christmas beetle count for sure. So thank you both for your time. Thank you everybody for joining us. We will have another Birds Meet session next month. It is another topic close to birds. It's a hobby that goes very much hand in hand with birds and birding. So stay tuned for the email. I think that session is going to book out really, really quickly. Thank you again, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Have an amazing rest of your evening, and we'll see you next month. Bye.